Homeless girl begged a millionaire to sleep in a doghouse. What happened next was unbelievable. He shoved the little girl into the mud and hissed that she was worth nothing, that she was better sold than saved. Rain poured down, soaking her thin dress as she clutched a torn teddy bear, trembling too hard to cry. At 8 years old, Emily had already learned silence was safer than hope. Then a man's voice cut through the storm, calm, cold, unshakable. Touch her again, and you'll regret it. The figure was Michael Hayes, a billionaire who lived in a mansion of glass and silence. He had buried love years ago, yet something in this broken child stirred what he thought was gone forever. Two worlds collided that night, power and helplessness, wealth and abandonment, and nothing would ever be the same. What would you have done in Michael Hayes' place? Walk away, or stand between a child and the darkness? Stay with me till the very end, and let me know where you're watching from, so I can see how far the truth really spreads. Michael Hayes had no reason to be there that night, yet he stopped the moment he saw the man shove the little girl to the ground. She was small, soaked through, her thin arms wrapped tight around a worn teddy bear. The man's voice was sharp, telling her she was nothing, that she was worth more sold than saved. Emily flinched at every word, clutching the bear so hard her knuckles turned white. She didn't fight back. She didn't even cry out. She only lowered her head, trembling, as if she had heard those words too many times before. The man raised his hand again, ready to strike. That was when Michael's voice broke the silence. Calm, low, and dangerous. Touch her again, and you'll regret it. The man turned, expecting another beggar, but instead found Michael staring back at him. Michael's gaze was steady, his jaw tight. He was a man used to being obeyed, not because he shouted, but because people knew he meant every word. His presence alone was enough to make the brute hesitate. For years, Michael had lived behind walls of power and wealth, never letting anyone close. Yet something in that child's hunched shoulders stirred a part of him he thought was long gone. Emily lifted her face for a moment. Her eyes were wide, frightened, but in them flickered a faint spark of hope. Her heart pounded so fast she thought the man might hear it. She could not believe it, that someone had stepped in, that someone was standing for her. She whispered into her bear's ear, as if telling it that maybe this time they were safe. Michael stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The man muttered under his breath and backed away, unwilling to challenge what he saw in Michael's eyes. Emily stayed on the ground, hugging the bear, not daring to move until she felt the shadow of Michael's coat beside her. For the first time in years, Michael wasn't thinking about deals or empires. He was looking at a child who had been told she was worthless and realizing he could not walk away. Emily had learned to stay quiet long before she could spell her own name. Silence was safer. Every time she spoke too loudly, someone told her to hush, or worse, someone raised a hand. Her mother had once held her close, pressing a little teddy bear into her arms and promising that as long as she held it, she would never be alone. When her mother's breath faded one night and never returned, Emily realized promises could vanish, but she clung to the bear anyway. She wandered from place to place after that, always someone else deciding where she would sleep or what she had to do. The men who found her on the street didn't see a child. They saw small hands that could slip into pockets and steal. Once, when she failed, one of them dragged her by the arm into a crowded shop and shouted at her for being useless. People stared. Some looked away. Others shook their heads. Emily lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning with shame, wishing she could disappear. From that day, she stopped meeting anyone's gaze, as if hiding her face could hide her worthlessness. At 8 years old, Emily already carried the look of someone much older. She never expected kindness. She never expected rescue. She only expected the next demand, the next blow, the next reason to keep her head down. But even then, somewhere deep inside, she held a fragile hope that someone might see her as more than a burden. That hope was faint, so faint she was afraid to believe in it. Michael's grief was of another kind, but it left him just as hollow. Years earlier, his wife had died in an accident that money could not prevent. He built towers of glass and steel, buried himself in contracts, but at night he ate alone in rooms too large for one man. He told himself that connection was dangerous, that caring for someone only led to loss. Yet when he looked at Emily clutching that ragged bear like it was her entire world, he saw a reflection of his own emptiness. Two lives scarred in different ways met in that rain-soaked moment, and neither of them would be the same again. Michael hesitated before opening the door, as if unsure what it would mean to let the child inside. He had not welcomed anyone into this space without reason for years. Emily stood close to him, clutching her bear, her wet hair sticking to her cheeks. Her eyes darted around like she expected to be told to leave at any second. When he finally gestured for her to follow, she stepped in carefully, as though even the floor might not allow her weight. She said nothing at first. Her small hands clung to the bear, while her gaze moved across walls that seemed impossibly tall. Michael noticed the way she kept her shoulders hunched, as if she was still bracing for a blow. He took her to the bathroom and turned on the faucet, watching steam rise. Emily froze, staring at the water as if she could not believe it was meant for her. She whispered to her bear, asking if it was real. When Michael left her with towels and closed the door, she moved slowly, dipping her fingers into the warmth. The shock made her gasp. She slipped into the tub, trembling, and for the first time in months felt heat sink into her bones. Tears mixed with the water, but she did not wipe them away. She let herself imagine her mother's hand smoothing her hair. When she finally stepped out, she wrapped herself in the towel-like armor and held it tightly around her small frame. Michael had placed one of his shirts on the counter. It hung loose on her, brushing past her knees, but she smoothed the fabric as though it were the finest silk. When she appeared again, he handed her a mug of milk with chocolate, the steam curling against her face. She stared at it too long, afraid it might vanish. Her first sip broke her, the taste too good, too soft, too kind. She began to cry, holding the mug with both hands. Between tears, she took another sip, unwilling to let go. Michael set a plate of cookies nearby. She nibbled at one, then quickly slipped another into her pocket when she thought he was not watching. Old habits, born of hunger. He noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he felt a weight in his chest, the kind that reminded him of everything missing in his own life. For years, his house had been filled with silence. Tonight, the sound of a child's soft chewing felt louder than any echo. As the night grew late, Emily fought against sleep. She looked at the sofa and whispered that she could stay there, promising she would not make a mess. Michael crouched to meet her eyes and told her she would sleep in a real bed. She shook her head, insisting she did not want to trouble him. He told her firmly it was decided. She followed him, uncertain, into a guest room. She stood at the doorway, staring at the bed as though it were a cloud she had no right to touch. Michael adjusted the pillows, awkwardly, his movements stiff from years without caring for anyone. Emily climbed onto the mattress, her bear tucked tight under her arm. The blanket swallowed her small frame, and her voice drifted out in a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Michael." He stopped in the doorway, the words catching him off guard. For the first time in years, something inside him stirred. It was not pity. It was the faint sound of life returning to a place he thought was lost. Emily woke up the next morning with her teddy bear still pressed against her chest. She walked slowly into the dining room, her eyes lowering when she saw the table already set. Michael sat with a newspaper in hand, but found himself watching her more than the words. She climbed onto the chair, her feet not reaching the floor, and stared at the plate in front of her. She began to eat quietly, chewing each bite as if it might be her last. When she thought he was not looking, she pushed part of the food to the side. It was the old habit of saving for later, the instinct of a child who never knew when the next meal would come. Michael said nothing at first, only noticing how her thin fingers trembled slightly as she moved the bread. He finally asked if she liked the food. She nodded quickly, eyes darting away, afraid that saying more might make it disappear. After breakfast, Michael told her they would go out together. Emily's eyes widened with uncertainty. She followed him into the car, holding the bear tightly on her lap. At the store, racks of clothes surrounded her, but she walked past the bright colors and fine fabrics. She picked up the plainest dress and the cheapest pair of shoes, then held them close to her chest. She whispered that these were enough and that he did not have to spend more. Michael crouched down, his hand resting lightly on her small shoulder. His voice was steady but softer than usual. He told her that she deserved more than enough. Emily looked at him with disbelief, as if no one had ever spoken those words to her before. She glanced at the clothes again, then back at him, unsure if it was safe to believe. For Michael, it was the first time in years he had felt the weight of guiding another life. For Emily, it was the first fragile step toward trust, a seed of hope planted in soil still full of shadows. Emily walked close to Michael, her small hand gripping his sleeve, when a voice cut through the street like a knife. Mark Riley stepped out from the shadows, his grin sharp and cruel. He told her she could not hide forever, that she belonged to him. Emily froze, the air stuck in her chest. She pressed herself against Michael's side, clutching her bear so tightly it hurt her arms. Michael shifted forward, placing himself between them, but Riley's words kept striking. He reminded Emily of the nights she stole food for him, the times she begged for scraps. Emily's eyes darted everywhere, searching for a corner, an alley, anywhere she could disappear. There was no escape. She hugged the bear higher under her chin, whispering into its ear like it could shield her. Clara Rossi appeared then, her face a mask of authority. She demanded to know why Michael had a child in his care, without papers, without notice to the state. Her voice was not cruel, but to Emily it sounded like another door closing. Not long after, Evelyn arrived, her sharp tone cutting through the air. She warned Michael of scandal, of the family's name dragged through the dirt. Each word pressed down on Emily, squeezing her smaller and smaller. She looked from Riley's sneer to Clara's stern eyes to Evelyn's cold disapproval. Her heart pounded, her breath came in quick bursts. She stepped back until her shoulders hit Michael's arm, trapped on all sides. The voices rose, colliding above her head, arguing about her life as if she were invisible. Her hands shook, her bear damp with her tears. Finally she broke. Her sobs cut through their arguments, raw and desperate. She cried out that she didn't want to go, that she only wanted to stay. She promised she would be good. She would not cause trouble. She would do anything if they let her stay with Michael. Her words came like gasps, her chest heaving, her whole body trembling as she begged. Michael laid a steady hand on her back, his voice low but firm, telling her she was safe. Riley sneered, Clara hesitated, Evelyn pursed her lips, but for a moment the noise fell silent. It was not the sound of a child being difficult. It was the cry of someone cornered, someone who had known fear too long, pleading not to lose the first place that felt like home. Clara had insisted it was only a checkup, something simple that every child needed. Emily agreed, trying to be brave, her bear tucked under her arm. Michael had hesitated, his gut twisting, but he finally let them go. Hours later the phone rang. Clara's voice cracked on the other end. They took her. 3 men dragged her into a van. She said his name over and over, her last words before they sped away. Michael's chest locked tight. For a moment he could not breathe. The thought of Emily, bound and terrified, was more than he could bear. Clara begged him to call the police. He shook his head, his voice raw. If the police came too soon, they would disappear with her. He knew Riley well enough to understand threats were never empty. He promised Clara he would bring the girl back, no matter the cost. That night he carried a bag of money through the empty streets, his steps heavy, his jaw clenched. In the warehouse, Emily sat tied to a chair, her wrists raw from the rope. Her face was pale, but her eyes lifted the moment she saw him. Her voice was a whisper that broke his heart. She told him she knew he would come. Michael placed the bag on the ground, demanding they let her go. Riley only laughed, circling them like a predator. Riley boasted that Emily belonged to him, that she was worth more than the cash. He spoke of selling her elsewhere, of using her in ways Michael could not stomach hearing. Michael's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay steady. Emily looked at Riley, and something shifted in her expression. She spoke up, her voice shaking but clear. She called him by his full name, Mark Riley. She spoke of his daughter's school, of his address, details she had overheard long ago. The men froze. She turned to the second one and named him too, speaking of his sick mother in Naples. Their bravado cracked, fear flickering in their eyes. Michael stared at her in awe. Even tied and trembling, she used the only weapon she had, her memory. Riley swore under his breath, cutting the ropes from her wrists, his eyes darting toward the exit. Then came the wail of sirens in the distance. Panic swept through the group. They bolted for the back door, leaving the money behind. Michael rushed to Emily, gathering her in his arms. She clung to him with every ounce of strength left in her body. Her face buried in his chest, her voice muffled but steady. She told him she had been afraid, but she knew he would come. His throat burned as he whispered that no one would ever take her from him again. It was not just a promise. It was a vow he felt carved into his bones. Clara had promised it was only a checkup, nothing more. Emily tried to be brave, her bear tucked under her arm, but Michael's gut twisted as he watched them leave. Hours later the phone rang, and Clara's voice cracked. They took her. 3 men dragged her into a van. She kept saying his name until they sped away. Michael's chest locked tight, his knees nearly giving way. For a long moment he couldn't breathe. Clara begged him to call the police, but he shook his head, his voice raw. If the police came too soon, they would vanish with her. He knew Riley well enough to understand threats were never empty. He swore he would bring Emily back with his own hands. That night, Michael carried a bag of money through the empty streets, his jaw clenched, but his hand trembling around the handle. In the warehouse, Emily sat tied to a chair, her wrists red and raw. Her eyes lifted the moment she saw him, and her voice came out like a broken whisper. She said she knew he would come. Michael set the bag down, his fingers shaking as he shoved it across the floor. He demanded they let her go. Riley laughed, circling them, his words sharp and vile. He said Emily was worth more than the cash, that she could be sold elsewhere. Michael's heart pounded so violently he thought it might break his ribs. His fist clenched, his body shaking with rage, but he forced himself to stay upright. If he lost control, he might lose her. Emily's gaze darted from Michael to Riley, and something inside her shifted. Even tied, she used the only weapon she had. She spoke Riley's full name, Mark Riley, and repeated the address of his daughter's school, details she had overheard long ago. The men stiffened. She turned to another and spoke of his sick mother, his real name. Fear flickered in their eyes. Their bravado cracked. Michael stared at her in awe, but his own chest still thundered. Riley swore, cut the ropes from Emily's wrists, and glanced toward the back door. Then came the sound of sirens, growing closer. Panic swept the room. They bolted, leaving the money behind. Michael fell to his knees, gathering Emily into his arms. She clung to him, her small body trembling, her bear pressed between them. She whispered that she had been afraid, but she knew he would come. His throat burned, his voice breaking as he promised that no one would ever take her from him again. It was not just a promise. It was a vow carved deep into his bones. The Hayes estate no longer felt like the cold fortress it once was. The long halls that used to echo with silence now carried the sound of hurried footsteps, laughter, and the questions of a child who finally felt at home. Books lay open on tables, drawings covered the refrigerator, and the garden bloomed with toys and flowers. For the first time in years, Michael felt his house was not a monument to loneliness, but a living home. Emily had blossomed. She still carried her bear, but not as a shield. Her shoulders were straighter, her smile unguarded. She spoke freely, and every now and then she teased Michael in a way that made him laugh out loud, something he had forgotten how to do. He realized she had given him more than joy. She had given him life. It was Emily who insisted they do something for the children still wandering without a place to belong. She said no child should ever feel like she once did, begging for scraps, asking for shelter where none was offered. Michael listened, and together they built Emily's haven. It was not made of marble or steel, but of warmth and open doors. It was a place where children were seen, held, and told they mattered. On the day the first center opened, Emily stood beside him, her small hand wrapped around his. She whispered that they were helping, and he told her it was because she had shown him how. Cameras flashed, people clapped, but all that mattered to Michael was the pride in her eyes. Pride and trust. Two things he never thought he would see reflected in a child's gaze again. At home, Emily worked in the garden for days, hammering pieces of wood together with fierce concentration. When she finally called him out, he saw a small wooden house painted white, with flowers planted all around. On a little plaque, she had written words for children still searching for a home. Her smile was shy as she explained. "This was the doghouse I once asked for, remember? The night I met you. But now it's for other children, so they know they belong." Michael bent down and wrapped her in his arms, his throat tight, his voice breaking. He told her she had given him more than shelter. She had given him a family. Emily leaned against him, her bear pressed between them, and for a moment the world felt whole. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, Emily asked to hear the story again, the night of the storm. The question she had whispered, trembling, asking if she could sleep in a doghouse. Michael told it softly, not as a tale of pity, but as the beginning of everything. What started with that frightened plea had grown into a family, and into a legacy of compassion that would outlive them both. From a rain-soaked night where a frightened child clutched a ragged bear, to a warm home filled with laughter, Emily's journey with Michael was more than rescue. It was a rebirth for both of them. She found a father, and he discovered the family he thought he had lost forever. Their story reminds us that love and compassion can change the course of a life, and that no child is ever truly beyond hope. What began with a trembling plea to sleep in a doghouse became a legacy called Emily's Haven, a shelter for countless others. And maybe that's the real lesson. When we choose to open our hearts, we don't just change one life, we transform the world around us. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Let others feel its warmth. And join us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Emotional Echoes. Together, we keep these echoes of love alive. Thanks for listening.